It's time for our weekly chat with South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on KWAT, and a lot to cover this morning, Kristi, as the legislative session winds down to a final handful of days out in Pierre. I wanted to cover some of the things that have been addressed out there by lawmakers. One topic of conversation, and I believe there was a bill introduced on this, that would reduce the state sales tax in South Dakota by a 0.5 percentage point. Now, we're not a high-tax state in South Dakota, but that sales tax revenue is key to meeting our budget needs. What were your thoughts on reducing the state sales tax?
Well, reducing the sales tax was something I and my staff have looked at for probably the last year, just seeing what the possibilities are of addressing our sales tax, lowering the burden on people in the state. We do have one of the lowest tax rates in the nation. In fact, we're in the top 5 for least taxes that are imposed upon our people, and I'm always in favor of looking for opportunities to do more. We also have to have a responsibility to look into the future and see what our economy is going to be like, make sure we're meeting the responsibilities of state government and fulfilling our commitment to some of the programs that we have. We know with inflation skyrocketing, with interest rates coming, we expect that agriculture will have a little bit of a more difficult time in the future because of increased energy costs and lack of supply chain, getting fertilizer here, different market access that'll be challenged because of the turbulence we see in the world, that we've got a pretty unpredictable future ahead of us. So, in my recommendation, I looked at saving money, making sure that we were keeping dollars and meeting the needs of the state, but also preparing for a tough economy in the future. I know the legislature was debating all of these things as well, and I think that looking at the environment that we have right now, they've decided to look at committing to paying off some of our debts and putting more into reserves to prepare for some of the needs we'll have in the future, like $600-700 million worth of prisons that we have to build in the next few years. That's all things that you have to balance as a state government. So it's a debate that will continue to happen. We are reducing taxes this year. I think the sales tax rate may not change, but legislative session's not over yet either, Mike. We got a couple weeks here left, and there's always a lot of changing discussion going on. We just don't want to be in a situation where we got to come back in 2 years because the revenue of the state has slowed down so much we end up cutting funding for education or healthcare providers or individuals that truly are struggling and need some of the programs that we provide.
Like it or not, Governor, there's been a lot of talk about marijuana during this year's legislative session, including recreational marijuana and the legislature legalizing recreational marijuana use. I know in previous conversations with Governor Noem, she always tells me, Mike, I've never met anyone who's gotten smarter by smoking dope. And I'm guessing that your opposition to recreational marijuana use has not changed.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. It's just, recreational marijuana comes with a lot of consequences. And the legislature did have that debate. Someone brought a bill to legalize recreational marijuana. It did get killed through the process. We do have a medical program that, I had implemented, but also recommended a lot of changes to last year to make sure that it had integrity and was the best run program in the country. Last year I brought those changes. Legislature did not want to make any reforms, but this year now they've brought over 60 bills to make some of the recommendations I had previously made. So I think that seeing how our medical program rolls out is important, and that we also recognize the consequences that come with recreational marijuana. So I just have never been in favor of recreational. I've always supported medical if it's done correctly. We'll see what the legislature decides as well, but I think there's some conversation, Mike, it may be on the ballot this fall. We'll see if that initiated measure comes forward too.
There was an interesting bill in the House yesterday that was passed by the House that would change the requirements for students who are on the Freedom Scholarship, and it would lower the GPA requirement from 2.5 to 2.0. And supporters say that it would encourage students who have a bad semester from not dropping out. Opponents say, well, lowering the GPA requirement, that is only promoting mediocrity in the classroom. Now that bill is being sent to your desk for consideration. What are your thoughts on that, Governor?
Well, we're taking a look at it. It's a new scholarship, so it's not something that we've had in the state for very long. It just got funded last year and stood up. So I think in the beginning process, we'll see how many students scholarship to further their education, ones that would probably not have had access without this kind of help. So I think it's important to make sure that the dollars get appropriated to students and see if what some of that testimony is really plays out and goes forward. So I'll be taking a look at that bill. There's a couple of days here to really make sure the language is tightened up and accurate, and then we'll let folks know how it'll move forward. But it was good debate, and that's what the legislative process is to talk about these different qualifications and see if they are appropriate for our students in South Dakota. I like to set the bar high for my own kids, Mike. I think you expect more. People always try to attain those levels of commitment and success, but I know that the legislature also wants to make sure that they don't leave students without the help that they need, even if they are going through a difficult time period in their lives.
There's a House Select Committee on Investigations, Governor. I believe it's a 9-member committee that's been meeting. They've subpoenaed witnesses and heard testimony regarding the fatal crash that Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg was involved in. What is your opinion, Governor, on how that process has played out? Obviously, no decision has been made yet on impeachment, but the process itself, are you pleased with how that's gone?
Well, it's a legislative process, so it's their prerogative to run it how they see fit. I don't think it's been transparent, and I don't believe the public knows the truth. So I've been pretty open in saying that I think the Attorney General should step down. I think his conduct after this incident happened has not been to the highest standards that the Attorney General, the top cop in the state, should have. And I've been pretty clear about that. But the legislature will run this process how they see fit. I just want the public to know the truth and to hear the seriousness of what this investigation shows and make that decision as well when they give their comments back to the House of Representatives and their folks that are on that committee. Legally, every single member of the House has access to that investigation file. Encourage them to read it before they make their decision on what impeachment should be or not be.
You were in Orlando over the weekend, Governor, speaking at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, and I watched some of that speech yesterday, and obviously you had a very captive audience of conservatives out in the audience, and you covered a lot of topics, but if there were a couple of points that you really wanted to drive home in that speech, or points that you wanted to make, what were they?
I want people to really think about the gift we were given as a country. We lose sight of that sometimes. We get arguing over our petty little policy differences and think that our lives are so hard and difficult when we forget what our founders went through and those in our history to give us this greatest experiment in human history when they created the United States of America. So I told the story of Henry Knox, who, was a volunteer in General Washington's Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, and how he realized that General Washington was outgunned. The Continental Army just had their own muskets. They were fighting the British, who had cannons and all kinds of artillery, and Henry was a bookstore owner who went and, with a group of volunteers, dismantled 60 tons of cannons and weapons, moved them 30 miles over a lake, 300 miles over frozen land to get them set up to protect the army. And General Washington, with those resources, was able to, defeat the British in that battle for Boston. So, we many times forget what grit is like, what determination is. And, many times we have forgotten what hard and challenging times people went through, and we should focus on that gift and just really think about how committed are we to saving this country.
Tonight, Governor, President Biden will deliver his first State of the Union speech, and it comes at an interesting time when Russia is at war with Ukraine. We have rising energy prices, rising inflation, We've got immigration, border security issues that are still ongoing. Obviously, you and President Biden do not see eye to eye politically. Ideology-wise, you are on two different platforms. But when President Biden delivers that State of the Union speech tonight, what would you like to hear from him?
Well, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I would like to hear him say that he's going to do a reset, that he's immediately going to reinstate the Keystone Pipeline, open up our federal lands to drilling again, and the Outer Continental Shelf, that we will use American resources and prioritize making sure we're energy independent, and then working with our NATO and European allies to corner Russia out and destroy their economy by providing energy to folks that currently Russia has captive. So it's all in our hands. The United States was almost 100% energy independent before Joe Biden came into the White House, and on day one he undermined America to become more reliant on Russia, and it has weakened us and weakened the entire country. We spend $53 million a day, Mike, buying Russian oil in the United States of America. We import 22 million barrels a month from Russia for the United States economy. That's unacceptable when we have the resources right here on our own land that we could utilize. We are giving them the money and the resources that Russia needs to destroy Ukraine, and it's all because we have a weak president.
Christy, I'm not sure if it's because of issues like the war between Russia and Ukraine pushing COVID off the top of the fold, so to speak, in terms of news headlines. It seems to me like we're hearing less and less about COVID all the time. I know you can't predict the future. You're not a doctor, but do you feel good about where we're at as a country, and more specifically South Dakota, roughly 2 years into this pandemic?
Well, in South Dakota specifically, our cases have dropped dramatically, and we do have another variant that's out there that we're watching. Talking to researchers around the world, which I do on a regular basis, they say this virus is man-made. It changes rapidly because of the nature of how it was created. Therefore, we've already gone through enough variants that we've been through the Greek alphabet. We just only talk in the news about the ones that are significant. So it's impossible to stop this virus, just like any other virus. We can slow it down, but we have to live our lives. So I think that the people making their voices heard in their states and communities have made a difference. We need to be able to conduct day-to-day life and figure out how to live with this virus. I'm glad to see some areas of the country are finally opening up and realizing that. I'm optimistic about South Dakota because our people have just been rock stars all along. They're responsible. They do what they need to do to take care of their family's health, and they go about and run their businesses and embrace their freedoms. So, I'm optimistic always about our future. When you look at the country, I've seen this virus be used as a political weapon. So I'm not sure when they'll try to, keep utilizing it to get an agenda passed. That's something that we're going to have to be vigilant on.
I'm not sure how much you or your staff, Christy, have delved into this next topic, but there are at least a couple of companies that want to build pipelines that would go through South Dakota and transport liquid carbon dioxide from ethanol plants to underground storage up in North Dakota. And I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about it. And I'm not sure your level of knowledge on this either. Based on what you know to this point, is it something that you could be supportive of? Because obviously these pipeline projects, when it comes to the environmental crowd, there can be a lot of pushback against those.
There is. I'm certainly watching these pipeline projects and talking with those that are involved. There's also quite a few landowners that don't like these projects. They don't want the pipelines crossing their land, and they're not supportive. So I would say in South Dakota still it's a little contentious. It is an opportunity for us to market some of this liquid carbon. Also, our ethanol plants are supportive. It gives them another opportunity to market a byproduct of what they generate for our energy supply. It's the technology and the research is there. I think the real question has been on where these pipelines go and whose land they touch. So there's many county commissioners that are addressing this and taking public hearings and testimony and getting feedback from people in their areas, and we'll continue to be involved. Right now, the decision-making certainly isn't in my hands, but it is something that shows promise. We just have to ensure that it is something that the people want and support. I'd say years ago, Mike, and we've seen oil pipelines be controversial, although we know that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of pipelines underneath the ground, supplying our energy supply in this country, and the technology for pipelines has been so dramatically improved over the years that it's just amazing how safe and secure they really are. We've also known that back when ethanol plants were being started, they were controversial. A lot of the different alternative energy sources that we have, when it's a new market, people question it, do their due diligence, and research it, and I think it's appropriate to do so at this time, too.
You made a key hire recently, Governor, naming a new head of the Department of Corrections. Tell us who you hired and why that person will be a good fit for that job.
Well, I'm going to kind of wait till she gets here to really talk a lot about her, but we are thrilled to have a new Secretary of Corrections. She is a reformer that has been in prison systems across the country, came in and really focused on making sure that we didn't just incarcerate people, but we were giving them opportunities to be successful when they came out of the system. So mental health challenges, addiction challenges, safety and security for individuals that were in our systems was incredibly important. So she'll be here soon. She's leaving a private company right now, but I'm thrilled that she's coming here, and she's focused on making sure that our Department of Corrections has integrity, people can trust it, and that it gives people an opportunity to be successful. And
she'll be on board starting that new job, I believe, next week, next Monday, March 7th. Christy, as the session winds down, out of curiosity, I had a question for you. And sometimes I will get emails from your office that outline maybe a dozen bills, maybe a couple of dozen bills that you've signed into law. And I'm curious about that process. You're obviously very, very busy. When you decide whether to sign or veto a bill, how involved are you personally in that process, or do you need to rely on people in your inner circle who maybe have more time to delve into these bills to let you know if they're a bill that you should sign or veto?
Well, I spend several hours every day looking at every single bill that's being debated at the legislature. So if a bill makes it through a House committee, we have a policy discussion about it with my general counsel, with my policy staffers, about what the testimony was, what we learned, how it was amended. So the whole way through the legislative process, every single bill is on my radar, and I've had discussions about it. We also have a lot of lawyers going through the language, seeing how it interacts with other statutes. So by the time it gets to my desk, we go over what the final version looks like. My staff goes through each word and language to make sure there's not something in there that got missed that would have unintended consequences. The lawyers run through it. We go in my office and have a discussion on each specific bill. I read it again for a final time, and then we decide if we should sign it into law or not. So I couldn't do a good analysis without my staff, but I also take personal responsibility for every single piece of legislation, making sure that it doesn't have some kind of a flaw or something in it that needs to be addressed before it goes into statute.
And as we're down to these final handful of days in this year's legislative session, what will you be paying attention to, and what should we in the public be watching for in terms of unfinished business yet?
Well, number one, it's the budget. Our responsibility is to produce a balanced budget according to the state constitution, that it meets the priorities of the state. So for me, that's the priority of governor, with putting forward a responsible budget, watching the legislature debate it, amend it, change it, and then me being in a position where I have to decide if I want to sign that budget or not. At the end of the day, I've got to sign it, so I'm hopeful that it's something that really reflects what the values of South Dakota are. But I spend a lot of my time on that. We're still continuing to watch different pieces of that budget, projects that could get funded, housing or the rifle range, West River. All of those are pieces that the legislature will have debate on, and if they want to do, there's significant investments in each of our universities as well. The policy discussions are still ongoing. We've got critical race theory in our schools. and a bill that I brought to ban that's still up in the air. I'm hopeful that people will support it and make sure our kids are learning a true and honest history. And we've got some different pieces of legislation about vaccines and things like that we'll watch as well. So a lot of moving parts, but it's been a good session, and we're looking forward to wrapping it up.
Excellent. A great conversation again this week. Governor, thank you for your time, and we'll do it again next week.
Take care, Mike. Good to visit.